Chapters 14 and 15. It is a most miserable thing to feel ashamed of home. There may be black ingratitude in the thing, and the punishment may be retributive and well deserved. But that it is a miserable thing, I can testify. Home had never been a very pleasant place to me because of my sister's temper. But Joe had sanctified it, and I had believed in it. I had believed in the best parlour as a most elegant saloon. I had believed in the front door as a mysterious portal of the temple of state, whose solemn opening was attended with a sacrifice of roast fowls. I had believed in the kitchen as a chaste, though not magnificent apartment. I had believed in the forge as the glowing road towards manhood and independence. Within a year, all that had changed. Now it was all coarse and common, and I would not have had Miss Havisham or Estella see it on any account. How much of my ungracious condition of mind had been my own fault, how much Miss Havisham's, how much my sister's, is now of no moment to me or anyone. The change was made in me. The thing was done, whether ill or well done, excusably or inexcusably. It was done. Once it seemed to me that when I should at last roll up my shirt sleeves and go into the forge, Joe's prentice, I should be distinguished and happy. Now the reality was in my hold. I felt only that I was dusty with the dust of small coal, and that I had a weight upon my daily remembrance to which the anvil was a feather. There have been occasions in my later life, I suppose, as in most lives, when I have felt for a time as if a thick curtain had fallen on all its interest and romance to shut me out of anything save dull endurance any more. Never has that curtain dropped so heavy and black as when my way in life stretched out before me through the newly entered road of apprenticeship with Joe. As I was getting too big for Mr. Wopsle's great-aunt's room, my education under that preposterous female terminated. Not, however, until Biddy had imparted to me everything she knew, from the little catalogue of prices to a comic song she once bought for a halfpenny. Whatever I acquired, I tried to impart to Joe. This statement sounds so well that I cannot in my conscience let it pass unexplained. I wanted to make Joe less ignorant and common, that he might be worthier of my society and less open to Estella's reproach. The old battery out on the marshes was our place of study, and a broken slate and a short piece of slate pencil were our educational implements, to which Joe always added a pipe of tobacco. I never knew Joe remember anything from one Sunday to another, or to acquire under my tuition any piece of information whatever. Yet he would smoke his pipe at the battery with a far more sagacious air than anywhere else, even with a learned air, as if he considered himself to be advancing immensely. Dear fellow. I hope he did. One Sunday, when Joe, greatly enjoying his pipe, had so plumed himself on being most awful dull that I had given up on him for the day, I lay on the earthwork for some time with my chin on my hand, descrying traces of Miss Havisham and Estella all over the prospect, in the sky and in the water, until at last I resolved to mention a thought concerning them which had been much in my mind. "Joe," said I, "don't you think I ought to make Miss Havisham a visit?" "Well," returned Joe, slowly considering. What for, Pip? What for, Joe? What is any visit made for? There is some visits, perhaps, said Joe, as forever remains open to question, Pip. But in regard of visiting Miss Havisham, she might think you wanted something, expected something from her. Don't you think I might say that I didn't, Joe? Oh, you might, old chap, said Joe, and she might credit it. Similarly, she mightn't. Joe felt as I did that he had made a point there, and he pulled hard on his pipe to keep himself from weakening it by repetition. You see, Pip, Joe pursued, as soon as he was past this danger, Miss Havisham done the handsome thing by you. When Miss Havisham done the handsome thing by you, she called me back to say that were all. Yes, Joe, I heard her. All, Joe repeated very emphatically. Yes, Joe, I tell you I heard her. Which I mean to say, Pip, it might be that her meaning were, make an end on it. As you was, me to the north and you to the south, keep in sunders. I had thought of that too, and it was very far from comforting me to find that he'd thought of it, for it seemed to render it more probable. But, Joe— Yes, old chap? Here I am, getting on in the first year of my time, and since the day of my being bound, I've never thanked Miss Havisham, or asked after her, or shown that I remember her. That's true, Pip. And unless you was to turn her out a set of horseshoes all four round, and which I mean to say, as even a set of shoes all four round might not be acceptable as a present in a total vacancy of hoofs. I don't mean that sort of remembrance, Joe. I don't mean a present. But Joe had got the idea of a present in his head and must harp upon it. Or even, said he, if you was helped to knock out a new chain for her front door, or say a gross or two of shark-headed screws for general use, or some light fancy articles such as a toast and fork when she took muffins, or a gridiron when she took a sprat, or such like. I don't mean any present at all, Joe, I interposed. Well, said Joe, still harping on it as though I had particularly pressed it, if I was yourself, Pip, I wouldn't. No, I would not. For what's a door chain when she's got always one chained up anyway? And shark adders is open to misrepresentations, and if it was a toast and fork, you'd go into brass and do yourself no credit. And the uncommonest workman can't show himself uncommon in a gridiron, for a gridiron is a gridiron, said Joe, steadfastly impressing it upon me, as if he were endeavouring to rouse me from a fixed delusion. And you may haim at what you like, but a gridiron it will come out, whether by your leave or agin your leave. And you can't help yourself. My dear Joe, I cried in desperation, taking hold of his coat, don't go on in that way. I never thought of making Miss Havisham any present. No, Pip, Joe assented, as if he were contending that all the way along. And what I say to you is, you are right, Pip. Yes, Joe. But what I wanted to say was that as we are rather slack as we are just now, if you would give me a half holiday tomorrow, I think I would go uptown and make a call on Mrs. Havisham. Which her name, said Joe gravely, "'Ent Est Havisham, Pip, unless she's been rechristened. I know, Joe, I know it was a slip of mine. What do you think, Joe? In brief, Joe thought that if I thought well of it, he thought well of it. But he was particular in stipulating that if I was not received with cordiality, or if I were not encouraged to repeat my visit as a visit which had no ulterior motive, but simply one of gratitude for a former present received, then this experimental trip should have no successor. And by these conditions, I promised to abide. Now, Joe kept a journeyman, that is, a weekly workman paid at weekly wages, whose name was Orlick. He pretended that his Christian name was Dolge, a clear impossibility, but he was a fellow of that obstinate disposition, I believe him to have been the prey of no delusion whatever, but wilfully to have imposed that name upon the village as an affront to its understanding. He was a broad-shouldered, loose-limbed, swarthy fellow of great strength, never in a hurry and always slouching. He never even seemed to come to work on purpose, but would slouch in as if by mere accident. And when he went to Jolly Bargeman to eat his dinner or went home at night, he would slouch out like Cain or the Wandering Jew, as if he had no idea of where he was going and no intention of ever coming back. He lodged at a sluice keeper's out on the marshes, and on working days would come slouching from his hermitage with his hands in his pockets and his dinner loosely tied in a bundle round his neck and dangling on his back. On Sundays, he mostly lay all day on the sluice gates, with his eyes on the ground, and when accosted or otherwise required to raise them, he looked up in a half-resentful, half-puzzled way, as though the only way he thought that it was rather odd and injurious that he should ever be made to think at all. This morose journeyman had no liking for me. When I was very small and timid, he gave me to understand that the devil lived in the black corner of the forge, and that he knew the fiend very well. Also, that it was necessary to make up the fire once every 7 years with a live boy, that I might consider myself fuel. When I became Joe's prentice, Orlick was perhaps confirmed in some suspicion that I would replace him. Howbeit, he liked me still less. Not that he ever said anything or did anything openly importing hostility. I only noticed that when he always beat his sparks in my direction, and that whenever I sang Old Clem, he came in out of time. Dolge Orlick was at work and present next day when I reminded Joe of my half-holiday. He said nothing at the moment, for he and Joe had got a piece of hot iron between them, and I was at the bellows. But by and by he said, leaning on his hammer, "Now, master, surely you're not a-going to favour only one of us. If young Pip has half-holiday, do as much for old Orlick." I suppose he was about 25, but he usually spoke of himself as an ancient person. "Why, what'll you do with a half-holiday if you get it?" said Joe. "What'll I do with it? What'll he do with it? I'll do as much as him," said Orlick. "As to Pip, he's going up-town," said Joe. "Well then, old Orlick will go up-town," retorted the worthy. "Two can go up-town. 'Tain't only one of 'em go up-town." "Don't lose your temper," said Joe. "Shell if I like," growled Orlick. "Some and they're up-town and... Now, master, come! No favouring in this shop. Be a man." The master refused to entertain the subject until the journeyman was in a better temper. Orlick plunged at the furnace, drew out a red-hot bar, made it at me as if he were going to run me through with it, whisked it round my head, laid it on the anvil, hammered it out as if it were I thought, and the sparks were my spurting blood, and finally said, when he had hammered himself hot and the iron cold, he leant upon his hammer. "Now, master!" "Are you all right now?" demanded Joe. "Ah, I'm all right," said gruff old Orlick. "Then, as in a matter of the fact that you stick to your work as well as most men," said Joe thoughtfully, "let it be a half holiday for all." My sister had been standing silent in the yard within hearing. She was a most unscrupulous spy and listener, and she instantly looked in at one of the windows. "Like you fool," she said to Joe, "giving half holidays to great idle hulkers like that. You're a rich man, upon my life, to waste wages in that way. I wish I was his master." "You'd be everyone's master if you could," retorted Orlick with an ill-favoured grin. "Let her alone," said Joe. "I'd be a match for all the noodles and all the rogues," returned my sister, beginning to work herself into a mighty rage. "And I couldn't be a match for the noodles without being a match for your master, who's the dunder-headed king of the noodles. And I couldn't be a match for the rogues without being a match for you, who are the blackest looking and worst rogue between this and France. Now, you're a foul shrew, Mother Gargery. That's what you are, a foul shrew," growled the journeyman. "And if that makes a judge of rogues, you ought to be a good un." "Let her alone," said Joe. "What did you say?" cried my sister, beginning to scream. "What did you say? What did that fellow Orlick say to me, Pip? What did he call me, and my husband standing by? Oh, oh, oh!" Each of these exclamations was a shriek, and I must remark of my sister what is equally true of almost all the violent women I have ever seen, that passion was no excuse for her, because it is undeniable that instead of lapsing into a passion, she consciously and deliberately took extraordinary pains to force herself into one, and became blindly furious by regular stages. "What was the name he gave me before the best man who swore to defend me? Oh, hold on to me, hold!" "Ah," growled the journeyman between his teeth, "I'll hold you. If you was my wife, I'd hold you under the pump and choke it out of you." "Let her alone," said Joe. "Oh, to hear him!" cried my sister, with a clap of her hands and a scream together, which was the next stage. "To hear the names he's given me, that old Orlick, in my own house, the married woman with my husband standing by. Oh, oh, oh!" Here my sister, with a fit of clappings and screamings, beat her hands upon her bosom and her knees, and threw her cap off and pulled her hair down, which were the last stages in her road to frenzy. Being by this time a perfect fury and a complete success, she made a dash at the door, which fortunately I had locked. What could the wretched Joe do now, after his disregarded parenthetical interruptions, but stand up to his journeyman and ask him what he meant by interfering twixt himself and Mrs. Joe, and further whether he was man enough to come on? Old Orlick felt that the situation admitted of nothing less than coming on, and was on his defence straight away. So, without so much as pulling off their singed and burnt aprons, they went at one another like two giants. But if any man in the neighbourhood could stand up long against Joe, I never saw him. Orlick, as if he had been of no more account than the pale young gentleman, was very soon among the coal dust, and in no hurry to come out of it. Then Joe unlocked the door and picked up my sister, who had dropped insensible at the window, but who had seen the fight first, I think, and who was carried into the house and laid down, and who was recommended to revive, and would do nothing but struggle and clench her hands in Joe's hair. Then came that singular calm and silence which succeed all uproars, and then with the vague sensation which I always connected with such a lull, namely, it was Sunday, and somebody was dead, I went upstairs to dress myself. When I came down again, I found Joe and Orlick sweeping up without any other traces of discomposure than a slit in one of Orlick's nostrils, which was neither expressive nor ornamental. A pot of beer had appeared from the Jolly Bargeman, and they were sharing it by turns in a peaceful manner. The lull had a sedative and philosophical influence on Joe, who followed me out into the road to say as a parting observation that might do me good, "On the rampage, Pip, and off the rampage, Pip. Such is life." With what absurd emotions, for we think the feelings that are very serious in a man quite comical in a boy, I found myself again going to Miss Havisham's matters little. Now I pressed on and passed and repassed the gate many times before I could make up my mind whether or not to ring, nor how I debated whether I should go away without ringing her, nor how I should undoubtedly have gone if any time had been my own to come back. Miss Sarah Pocket came to the gate, not Estella. "How then, you again?" said Miss Pocket. "What do you want?" When I said that I had only come to see how Miss Havisham was, Sarah evidently deliberated whether or no she should send me about my business, but unwilling to hazard the responsibility, she let me in, and presently brought the sharp message that I was to come up. Everything was unchanged, and Miss Havisham was alone. "Well," she said, fixing her eyes upon me, "I hope you want nothing. You'll get nothing." "No, indeed, Miss Havisham, I only wanted you to know that I am doing very well in my apprenticeship, and I am always much obliged to you." There, with the old restless fingers. "Come now then, come on your birthday. Aye," she cried suddenly, turning herself with her chair towards me. "You are looking round for Estella, eh?" I had been looking round, in fact, for Estella, and I stammered that I hoped she was well. "Abroad," said Miss Havisham, "educating for a lady, far out of reach, prettier than ever, admired by all who see her. Do you feel that you have lost her?" There was such a malignant enjoyment in her utterance of the last words, and she broke into such a disagreeable laugh that I was at a loss. She spared me the trouble of considering what to say by dismissing me. When the gate was closed upon me by Sarah of the walnut shell countenance, I felt more than ever dissatisfied with my home and with my trade and with everything, and that all I took was by that notion. As I was loitering along the high street, looking disconsolately into the shop windows and thinking what I would buy if I were a gentleman, and who should come out of the bookshop but Mr. Wopsle, who agreed to walk home with me. It was dark when we set out for our walk home. Beyond town we found a heavy mist out, and felt it wet and thick. The turnpike lamp was a blur, quite out of the lamp's usual place apparently, and its rays looked solid substance on the fog. We were noticing this, and saying how much the mist had rose with a change of wind for a certain quarter of our marshes, when we came upon someone slouching under the lee of the turnpike house. "Hullo," we said, stopping. "Is that you, Orlick?" "Aye," he answered, slouching out. "I was standing by a minute on the choice of company." "You're late," I remarked. Orlick not unnaturally answered, "Well, and you're late." I asked him presently whether he'd been spending his half-holiday well up and down town. "Yes," said he, "all of it. I come behind yourself. I didn't see you, but I must have been pretty close behind you. By the by, the guns is going again." "At the hulks?" said I. "Aye, there's some birds flown from the cage. The guns have been going for some time. You'll hear one presently." In fact, we hadn't walked many yards further when the well-remembered boom came towards us, deadened by the mist, and heavily rolled away along the grounds of the river as if it were pursuing and threatening the fugitives. "Good night for cutting and running," said Orlick. "We'd be amazed and puzzled to bring down a jailbird on the wing tonight." The subject was suggestive to me, and I thought about it in silence. It was very dark, very muddy, and we splashed along. Now and then the sound of the signal cannon broke upon us again, and again rolled sulkily around at the course of the river. I kept myself and my thoughts to myself. Orlick sometimes growled, beat it out, old Clem, with a clink and a stout, old Clem." I thought he'd been drinking, but he wasn't drunk. Thus we came to the village, by the way of which we approached the Three Jolly Bargemen, which we were surprised to find, it being 11 o'clock, in a state of commotion, with the door wide open, and unwanted lights that had been hastily caught up and put down scattered about. Mr. Wopsle dropped in to ask what was the matter, surmising that a convict had been taken, but came running out in a great hurry. "There's something wrong," said he, stopping. "Up at your place, Pip! Run, all!" What is it?" I asked, keeping up with him. So did old Orlick at times. I can't quite understand. The house seems to have been violently entered when Joe Gargery was out. Someone, supposed by convicts, somebody has been attacked and hurt." We were running too fast to admit of any more being said, and we made no stop now until we got to our kitchen. It was full of people. The whole village was there, or in the yard. And there was a surgeon, and there was Joe, and there was a group of women, all on the floor in the midst of the kitchen. The unemployed bystanders drew back when they saw me, and so I became aware of my sister, lying without sense or movement on the bare boards, where she had been knocked down by a tremendous blow on the back of her head, dealt by some unknown hand, when her face was turned towards the fire. Destined now never to be on the rampage again, while she was the wife of Joe.